Then we're going to bring it back for council discussion. Who would like to lead off here? Start with Councilmember Hughes, and then Vice Mayor Young and Councilmember Schwartzman.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight and staying so long. We didn't intend for it to be this late, but I appreciate you being here, and for those that shared their thoughts and opinions, I do appreciate that. Those that have followed the City Council over the years, I think you would hopefully agree that I am a big supporter of public health and safety. I think my record, my votes, my positions have demonstrated that over the years. I know when I mentioned earlier that I met with Andres and Kathy, and this is, I don't know how many, it's probably 3-4 months ago, and the first question they asked me was, what is your concerns related to an ISO? And what I shared with them is, it appeared, and I was comparing this to Program 3. I said, when I look at, and I had a side-by-side comparison of Program 3 and Contra Costa's ISO, and I said, as I look through this, it looks redundant. It looks like they're including the same elements, the same language. In fact, in some cases, Program 3 appeared to be more strict than the Contra Costa ISO. So we shared that. We had, I thought we had a fairly productive discussion. And now I went through the next process of comparing the proposed ISO from the working group to Program 4. And I'm finding the same thing. You heard some other speakers say the same thing. If you put them side by side, which they are in the, actually they're not in the staff report. I would have preferred that, because what I ended up having to do is what somebody else said, is I was highlighting one area and then going to the Program 4 to see if it was covered. And sure enough, there was a few exceptions, and I'll talk about those in a second. But for the most part, everything was covered in Program 4 and more, and Program 4 was more strict than, that I believe, the proposed ISO that's being proposed tonight. So I started to question what is the need, and I found 3 areas, and they were talked about tonight. The 3 areas that I saw that were different. One is an evacuation plan. So Program 4 does not talk about an evacuation plan. But my understanding, and I'll look to the city manager or the fire chief for confirmation on this, is that the city is working on an evacuation plan. Not just an evacuation plan that would relate to an incident at Valero, but for any incident throughout the city. It's an emergency evacuation plan. So I think that's covered. Is it covered today? No, but we are working in that direction. Accurate? Okay. The second is the community air monitoring, and we heard a lot about the Bay Area Air Quality Management District approving Valero's fence line monitoring proposal, but it still leaves open the community air monitoring. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the pros and cons, the benefits, the consequences, the risks associated with that. I know, and I take Marilyn on her word, because I worked on a committee that her and I were on for quite a few years, and fence line monitoring, community air monitoring was discussed at length. We're still not there yet, but I think that I know the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is interested in seeing that. They may not be as passionate as some of the folks in this room. California Air Resources Board has some thoughts, programs that we might be able to utilize as a city. And I would like to think that if we brought those 2 groups together with Valero and the city, we could then begin to look at what are the options, what are the obstacles, what are the issues that we need to address, what are the pros and the cons. I think that can be addressed that way. And then the third was more community involvement. And I think, I shouldn't say community involvement, I should say more effective communication from Valero, both to the city and to the community. And I think there was a big gap. There was a huge gap from the May 5th incident. The city recognizes that. I think Valero acknowledges that. I know the discussion that the one-on-one meeting I had with Don Wilson, who's the vice president and general manager of the plant, he indicated that things did not go as he expected, and that he wants to establish a much better, a healthier partnership relationship. Now, some might say, and I heard it tonight, well, their record doesn't show that we can trust them. Well, we need to continue to push in that direction, because I think we need to have a partnership. I think an ISO doesn't lend itself to a strong partnership. I think it lends itself to a us versus them type of relationship, and I don't think that's healthy. We can look back and we can say, well, it hasn't worked in the past. We need to continue to push in that direction. So those are the three areas that I saw were different from Program 4. I really do feel that the current regulations are not just adequate, but they're more than adequate, because they cover more than the proposed ISO or the Contra Costa ISO. And so I'm not going to be supporting the local ISO proposal, and I'm not going to support asking staff to draft a new one based on the information that they've heard tonight. But I am going to ask staff and my colleagues and Valero and some of the regulatory agencies to meet and discuss the few areas that I think are gaps between what we like to see versus what's in Program 4. But again, I don't think that those few areas warrant a full-blown ISO.
Young?
I've got some questions on the staff report. On page 415, it says that the cost of implementing an ISO could be significant and likely include employing and training additional staff. Well, we had talked about making this a fee-based ordinance. So in the event that it's a fee-based ordinance, what are the significant extra costs that you see?
I think one issue is that, Councilmember Hughes brought this up, that he wanted to see the draft ordinance compared. We got that draft ordinance on Tuesday, or I got it at least on Tuesday before the Wednesday that the report was due, so I didn't have anything in there about fees when that was written.
Okay, so you're just talking about a cost to review the proposed ordinance.
The cost to draft the ordinance was...
Well, we have a draft ordinance in front of us.
But when the staff report was written, I didn't have that.
I understand.
So may I also just interject? It wouldn't just be the cost of drafting the ordinance, it would also be implementation. And we're vague in the report. We just wanted to raise that as an issue. We really don't know right now what it's going to cost to implement whatever direction the council gives us.
Right, but if it is a fee-based project, there wouldn't be any cost to the city. Would you agree with that?
I don't know enough about it to give you a good answer. And that would make sense, but I don't know the implementation steps.
And you, if we have a draft ordinance in front of us that has been developed over a significant period of time at a significant cost to the attorney who did it pro bono, why would we not simply review that ordinance instead of starting all over with a new attorney and spending additional money to develop a new ordinance?
Well, if the council gives us direction to...
I'm wondering why that was the recommendation.
Again, we got the draft ordinance last Tuesday, and so there was no way that we could have given you a good response to that. And we still haven't really digested what we've been presented. If the council gives us direction tonight that you want to consider an ISO, we will certainly look at everything and look at the implementation and come back to you with that.
Okay. On page 417, it talks about the overlap between the Contra Costa ISO and the state regulations. And it makes some editorial words about great strides that have been made and significant advances that have been made. I'm not sure that everybody agrees with that description. So I don't know that it's appropriate for, in a staff report, to make these kind of judgments on policy stuff. But I'll leave that be. For the air monitoring, so Valero has submitted a plan to the Air District. They have approved it. Do we have a copy of that plan?
Yes, we did.
And where are the monitors to be placed?
I have not had a chance to review the entire document. I was just given it, and it's pretty thick. Hearing the testimony, it sounds like there are fence line monitors and certain aspects of the refinery, but I can also tell you we have people from Solano County resource here that have reviewed it, and
Good.
they might be able to answer that.
Do you know what the timeline would be for installing those monitors?
I do not know the timeline.
Do you know if that plan calls for the monitors to be viewable in real time over the internet?
I have not had a chance to review the plan.
Do you know if the monitors would detect hydrogen sulfide, as was talked about with the asphalt plant?
Like I said, I have not had a chance to review the plan.
Those are clearly things that we need to know. On page 469 is this chart that is called a comparison chart, attachment 4. You're familiar with that?
I am.
On the next page, it's called a comparison table, attachment 1. So that leads me to wonder, who prepared this chart?
I believe it was the Solano County Resource Management.
And so they used it for another purpose or for our?
I'm pretty sure it's on their website.
Could we ask them to come up to the podium and
Yeah,
answer your
please.
questions?
Please.
Colby and Jag, would you mind coming up? This table did come from them, and so they can better answer your questions.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and the council members. My name is Jag Sahota. I'm the Environmental Health Manager with Solano County, and with me is Colby Laplace, who is our Senior Hazardous Materials Specialist, and he is the main person responsible for the implementation of Program 4 at the Valero Refinery. Before we start answering your question, I kind of want to set the record straight on something was said about Solano County being a new CUPA. We have been a CUPA since 95, 96, and that's from the time that state actually started certifying local agencies as CUPAs. So just wanted to put it out there.
Do you
Thanks.
mind if I clarify that statement?
Sure.
So Dr. Gina Solomon, at the panel discussion we had to find out what the state and Contra Costa County did in terms of the refineries, she pointed out that they had just adopted, Cal EPA had just adopted the regulations in October of last year, and that she said that while the Solano staff was eager to get into the implementation, it would take about 5 years. So that is not my statement. That was the state supervising person representing Cal EPA.
I understand that, but from our perspective, I can tell you that we have been implementing the CalR program, which is a part of being the CUPA certification since the very inception of the program, and we have been participating in the governor's interagency refinery task force, and we have been providing our input, and we've been going to trainings, and I can tell you that we have the resources, we have the education, and we have the training, and we're ready to implement, and we are actually implementing the program at this time.
Go ahead.
Does that mean you'd also be ready to implement an ISO if it was adopted by the city and we contracted or didn't contract, but would the county then be willing to be the implementing agency for that?
Well, that's a possibility, but I'm not ready to comment on that, whether it would be done by us or not.
Is it your opinion that you're the only one who could do it?
I can say that we are a certified agency for carrying out the elements of the CUPA program, which right now is a Program 4. And I would say that the Industrial Safety Ordinance that is being proposed at this time, from the very cursory look, because we didn't have the document with us, it seems very similar to the Program 4 standards that we already have. And it seems very redundant as well. That's where I would leave it.
Okay. The representative from Valero talked about some letters that they submitted to the city. One of which included your report of August 23rd. I'm not sure that we received a copy of that, but we received it through the cover letter from Valero. And one of the things, and are you familiar with that letter?
I'm going to defer to Colby for that because he's the
Is that Colby LaPlace with Solano County? I'm a resident of Pinole, California.
Okay, and this was a letter that was sort of the review of the incident.
The May 5th incident?
Pardon me?
The May 5th incident?
Yes. Okay, and it was dated August 23rd. And in there, I went back to read it again, and one of the things that it said that caught my eye, at no time were any regulatory limits for sulfur dioxide exceeded at ground level, at no time. Well, we heard tonight that there were 70,000 pounds released over a 10-day period. So my question is, how could there not be a reading that exceeded the regulatory levels at no time?
They were at higher elevations.
At higher elevation?
Yes, the SO2 was at higher elevations. We had calibrated instruments. The Air Board did. There was an industrial hygiene group that's representative of the petrochemical industry that came out. We tested. The Air Board tested. I stand by that reading. They were not exceeded. There's ground level monitoring that Valero has. Nowhere was it exceeded. There was a lot of SO2. No denying it. It went high in the atmosphere. We were talking about ground level readings, not upper atmosphere readings.
Okay, so the monitors that you are using and that are being proposed now are ground level.
We do not monitor ground level
sorry,
except in emergencies.
Correct.
So it's an Air Board discussion, and I do understand that the Air Board does plan to put in monitors within the community, in addition to fence line monitors.
But you can understand why somebody who would read that would be skeptical.
I certainly could, yeah.
Okay. I guess that's all the questions I have for you guys. The draft ordinance, and I guess this is for staff, maybe if you can answer it, help, but the question for staff is, in the draft ordinance on page 481, it references the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act of 1986 that requires industries to report on storage, use, and release of hazardous materials to federal, state, and local governments. So I guess my question to the chief is, how many such reports have we received from Valero since 1986? Do you have any idea?
I do not.
Do you know if we've received any?
Any reports from Valero?
Yeah,
Yes.
on the release of hazardous materials.
Yes.
Okay. It also calls for the local emergency planning committee to be formed. And that local emergency planning committee is to include first responders, industry, and the public to work together to evaluate, understand, train, coordinate, and communicate about chemical hazards in the community. Do you know if that group has actually met?
I would not say 100%. I'm not sure if that's the same. Is that what would be in the ordinance that we were talking about?
The cap?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
The CAP is part of the settlement agreement with the Good Neighbor Steering Committee, which hasn't been called for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I do not have the answer to that.
Well, this is actually part of the state legislation.
I understand, but the CAP that they're referring to is the committee that the city has representatives to, is part of a Good Neighbor Steering Committee, which gets to the heart of agreements that we have with the city, with Valero.
So we have our own version, perhaps, of what's called for in this legislation.
No, it's just was supposed to enable people to meet and share information, learn about the process, comment on things that were happening. So it was, the idea was by the Good Neighbor Steering Committee to improve the communication. And then about a couple of years ago, I guess, they just stopped calling the meetings. And so they haven't been called for, I probably could be corrected to say a year and a half. Is that correct? Just to answer factually.
Can't give you the exact number of months, but the community advisory panel
Okay, let me repeat so the people hearing, because they can't hear you, is that the Community Action Panel, as a result of the Good Neighbors Committee, is basically called 4 meetings by Valero, and they determine more or less who's on that committee. The city appoints, but if Valero doesn't like who the city appoints, they don't notify the appointee. I was one of those people that wouldn't get notified, even though I appointed myself. During the general plan update process, we tried to form this concept of public right to know based on the US EPA. That was the whole basis for that general plan element. And that was the vision that we would have this community participation for developing emergency response plans, and it would be a continuous process. And it hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened, as we learned at the priority setting process, for 2 reasons. 1, we can't afford it, and 2, it's costly to involve the public.
So the last thing I'll say is I've been frustrated by the fact that it's been over a year since the May 5th event, and we have yet to have Valero come to a council meeting and talk about what really happened, much less answer questions about what they are doing to see that it doesn't happen again. And I don't think it's sufficient to meet with council members in private and not have a public discussion about what's going on and what the plans are going forward. That's one of the reasons that I'm going to support moving this item, but changing the staff recommendation to recommend, to direct them to review the existing working draft ISO proposal that has been prepared, rather than starting from scratch with a new one.
Okay, Councilmember Schwartzman?
So of the representatives of Valero in the room, who's highest up on the chain? Just curious. Would that be you? And you were Director of Operations? Okay, thank you. So I'm not ready to go on the ISO just yet. I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it. And I'm not saying that some of the aspects of it are necessary. I do believe that the Program 4 meets or exceeds the Contra Costa and Richmond. There's got a lot of good stuff in there in doing the comparisons, but as was alluded to earlier, there are a couple of areas which I also agree we need to dive in. And the question is how and when and how soon. And that's the problem for me, because I don't think anybody in this room, Valero-wise, can commit to sitting down and hammering out something within a particular period of time. So I think the only way that I could probably present this is that, to me, we need to definitely work on a communication. We need to work on fence line monitoring, because I don't think it's adequate and I don't think it's enough from what I understand. We definitely need community monitoring outside the fences. Got that down, okay? Those are very, very important to me. The evacuation plan is important, but there's reasons to have an evacuation plan that have nothing to do with Valero, because other things can happen in the industrial park. So we need an evacuation plan regardless. So I'm not saying that it's not important, but I'm not including that in this discussion, because I know we're working on it and it's critical that we get it done, but for reasons beyond just Valero. So the only thing that I would say, at this particular point, I am not going to support this moving forward. But I'm, for me, and I don't know if this is going to pass or whatever, but it's just my statement, if we cannot come back by the first meeting in November with an agreed solution to these issues, then I'm all in an ISO. That's my statement.
Well, let me address a couple of things. I heard some really good testimony about what we could be doing. And so at the beginning, there was a talk about Coupa and the involvement. How many community meetings, if you guys could come back up to the podium, while you're coming up, how many community meetings have you conducted in Benicia to engage the public about their concerns, about what the county's role is in terms of implementing the new regulations by Cal OSHA and Cal EPA?
Colby, LaPlace, Solano County, we have not had community meetings.
Community meetings here in Benicia?
We have not. We've kept the fire department informed. When we did the program 4 inspection, the first person we provided it to was the fire department. I went to Josh's office and we reviewed the whole program 4 inspection. When there was the release on May 5th, we were there. I was there the whole day during the May 5th incident. We participate. We have trained the Benicia Fire Department.
I'm sorry, the question though is how many community meetings where the general lay public has been invited and you've explained how CUPA works and you've explained and you have heard, maybe explaining and also have heard what the community's concerns are. You heard a lot of the community's concerns tonight, which is really good. But you've been authorized to prepare various programs to get them ready, to make recommendations on community air monitoring pursuant to the Cal EPA regulations, which will cost some money. And so you, the county, right now have that role. And do you have the funds to implement the community monitors that are called for by Cal EPA?
No, that is not within our purview. We don't do air monitoring.
Right.
And to answer your question, we have not had a community meeting.
Right. And that's the problem that we're trying to address with the Industrial Safety Ordinance. It is true that there's much in the draft Industrial Safety Ordinance that is exactly taken out of existing state regulations, both from Cal OSHA and Cal EPA. That was deliberate because we found it less confusing than to cherry pick our way through that applied to just certain Benicia things that are not covered as adequately. So that is why the ordinance is written that way. It's a fairly standard way of going about writing an ordinance. And the main purpose for the ordinance is to give us the seat at the table so we don't have to ask for reports. They actually are required to be submitted to Benicia. In order to do that, it costs money. And so all these recommendations that we heard is, I'm still not hearing how we pay for the staff. You've heard from our, you don't actually need to stand there. I don't need to talk to you and make you feel uncomfortable. Another example of why we need an industrial safety ordinance is when I did write to the city manager and asked for participation in the community AB 617, which I thought was a golden opportunity to make our case as a middle-class community. And the purpose of my saying that is that we don't get the benefits of a disadvantaged community. There's very good funding that's provided by the state, long overdue, and no complaints there. But the fact is that we fall behind all the other communities that are designated disadvantaged communities. And so we're left alone. And the response I had by staff about why we couldn't participate, couldn't send staff to an AB 16 or petition to be a community of concern that would be listed. You can go to the website and see that Benicia is not there. Vallejo is, but not Benicia. And that is because we can't afford it. Did we comment on the fence line monitoring program that has been approved by the Air District when that document was issued? Did staff have the ability to comment on that? Did they have the time? Going back to the May 5th incident, I was told by the former fire chief that he had to call Cal OSHA in order to go to get access to Valero. Now, under state law, he has the authority to go into a facility, and yet he was denied that access. And our very own fire chief had to call Cal OSHA. They came very quickly. and then he got access. So these are the situations that we experienced in the May 5th, and then also the issue of making sure that we are at the table where we can deal with all of these issues that you've heard that people say are good ideas. Communication is a good idea. How do we pay that? We constantly hear that our budget is very tight, and if we spend money with staff on some other item, that means we won't be able to do something else. Hear that all the time. So where would we get the money to provide the input and to be able to sit at the table and comment on reports? We're not rewriting the laws, we're trying to participate and get some feedback. Information from a collateral agreement. We've had agreements. Who pays for the participation by the city to follow up on a collateral agreement? What has happened to CAPS? Who followed up on that and say, hey, you know, we really need to get this meeting going? How do we pay for that? So it's the issue about all of the things that people have suggested as good ideas. I totally agree. They're great ideas. But there will be very limited follow-through and follow-up. If you don't institutionalize the city's participation with a seat at the table, you will not have consistency in that participation. Staff comes and goes. We love our staff, they go. We have new staff, they are going to have to be up to speed. With an ordinance, you don't have to explain all of that. And with a fee structure, you institutionalize the ability to participate. The second thing is the community right to know. How are we going to pay for the community right to know? How are we going to get public participation in developing an emergency response plan that Councilmember Schwartzman thinks is a really good idea that ought to respond to other things? We, again, learned at the priority budget setting session, we can't afford to do it that way. So it comes down to, if we want to be serious about being safe, and we want to be serious about knowing what's going on, what's in our air, possibly what's in our water, we need to have the resources to participate. And that is the request for this. So I appreciate Vice Mayor Young's support on directing staff to have qualified expert, subject matter expert with legal expertise to advise the city staff that will then prepare the report back to council about the ordinance. I think that's pretty much covers the issues that I've heard. I really do hope that we can be committed to at least directing staff for that part. And by the way, that is a recoverable cost because it would be part of that fee structure that the fire department would recommend to the city council. And so that's my request. Last word, and then we'll have a motion.
No last word. I was going to offer a motion.
Okay.
So my motion would be to approve option 2 in the staff report, direct staff to monitor Solano County's implementation of Program 4, and in addition, direct staff to meet with Valero and the appropriate regulatory agencies to address the few gaps that exist between the Contra Costa ISO and Program 4, including more effective, frequent communication with the city, Valero, and the community, fence line and community air monitoring, and an evacuation plan, although it sounds like the evacuation plan's underway, and that we would have a report back to the city council in the first meeting in November.
Well, I second that.
Okay, discussion. Councilmember Campbell?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of leaning toward Councilman Schwartzman's approach on this, but my position is basically I'll vote against this thing, right now, but I'd rather we, continue it for 6 months, give them a chance to put in the monitors, give them a chance to develop agreement to get the data to us, like I said before, at the same time they get it from the state, or they give it to the state, they give it to us. And if they can't do it in 6 months, I'm going to vote for an ISO. So I'd rather we continue to give them a chance. If they can't do it, then I'm fine with an ISO.
So just clarification on the motion. I think we're saying the same thing, is that they would have to come back to us, in November, which is 5.5 months, and provide us an update, at which time that would give us an option. If we're satisfied with the direction it's going, then we move forward. If we're not satisfied with the direction it's going, then we can vote on an ISO.
I physically want the monitors in place in 6 months. This has been going on since 2002 with me, and went out there, we had demonstrations of monitors, they were going to do the monitors, going to do all that. And, it's past time to just say you're going to do it, past time for anything. What has happened is the plan has been okayed for monitors. At the fence line by their district, the state ISO says you got to put in the monitors. So fine. That being the case, now it's time to put up. You put in the monitors, and if we want to add some in the community and embed them in there, fine. We can negotiate that when they're putting in the other monitors. The other point, which has been brought up by everybody here, is that communications is weak, but it's okay. We're going to change it. And I've heard that actually a few times myself. So I don't believe that that's enough anymore at this stage of the game. They have to have an agreement, and the agreement for me is really simple. What they give to the air board, what they give to the state, they give to us, and have to assume we are capable, which we are, of keeping a secret. So if something is a trade secret, something involves a lawsuit with PG&E, that we are capable of being quiet about it, realizing the confidentiality and the importance of the information. So those are the two things which stick out most to me, because we are working on, I guess, an emergency operations center with Valero, so that we have figured out the obvious problem. Valero wants the emergency operations center on their site. Well, if the refinery is burning up, it's not going to be a good place to put it. So we want to have it out where we are. So to some degree, that's being worked out already. And the two people from Solano, if I could get them to just come up for a second. I talked to Colby, about it, and I guess you guys have been going out there every week. The day before, you prepare for it, you go out, and the day after, you do sort of like a debriefing. So, yeah, maybe you haven't had any public, workshops or meetings, but, you're going out there and implementing what program for the state ISO is, right?
If I may explain, we looked at the incident on May 5th and said this must not happen again. And so we focused on what we thought could be the best prevention. And the best prevention was to make sure there was steam. So we went there and we looked at their utilities, because the program 4 opened up the refinery to us to inspect everywhere, where before it was a process block. So we focused on utilities, because if there's steam, you have atomization, you don't have that carbon cloud of soot contaminating Benicia. So that was our focus. We reviewed 1,000 documents. We spent about 500 hours there. We interviewed 22 subject matter experts. We visited the refinery 23 times. We spent a day before, we went to the refinery preparing, then we inspected the refinery, and then we spent a day afterwards reconciling what we saw, providing questions so that we could probe deeper into our inspection. So we believe that we did a very good job of that. We are trained. I've had training with US EPA, Cal OSHA, Contra Costa County, ISO. We've been with them. We participated in an ISO inspection at the Shell refinery. So we requested it. We have very good relationships with Contra Costa County, and we talk and we train each other. We learn from each other. So we did do that. Additionally, when we're on a refinery, we are a complete CUPA, which is different than Contra Costa ISO. They focus on Program 4. We don't. We focus on everything because we have authority to do all parts of the CUPA program. So when we're at the refinery, we're looking at hazardous waste. We're looking at hazardous materials. We're looking at underground storage tanks. We're reviewing above ground storage tanks. Solano CUPA has complete authority in, but Contra Costa divides it. They have a group. The ISO group is Program 4 related, but we're together. We do a complete inspection.
Okay, I just wanted to give you a chance to rehabilitate your image a little bit here,
Yes.
Thanks,
And as far as public participation goes, we realize that that's one aspect that Program 4 does not cover at this point. And we have offered to the city manager that, similar to what Contra Costa does at this point, where they have a staff member sit at a booth at like a public event, just as like a fair or some other public event, and they provide information, public comes to them, and they interact with the public, and if they have any questions, they answer those questions. And we can do something similar, and we know that Benicia has farmers markets, and we can have Colby be available during those days, maybe once a month, and be available to public for any interaction, any questions that public might have.
Okay, well, thanks.
We have a motion on the table, so
Clarification.
is there any further, do you want to repeat the motion, Ms. Wolf?
Well,
Well, I have approve option 2 and direct staff to monitor the Solano County's program, and then there was.
And I can clarify it. What it says is approve option 2 in the staff report and direct staff to monitor Solano County's implementation of Program 4. And in addition, direct staff to meet with Valero and the appropriate regulatory agencies to address the few gaps that exist between Contra Costa's ISO and Program 4, including more effective communications with the city, Valero, and the community, and fence line and community air monitoring. I'd be willing to amend that to address your issue. That, and I'm saying, I don't know, well, let me ask this, through the chair. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District just approved last week the fence line monitoring proposal from Valero. Did that include an implementation plan? 1 year. Within 1 year?
So the answer from
No.
the audience to the question was within 1 year, and no what monitors?
No community.
Right, exactly. So it's approved of the fence line monitoring on the southeast side.
Right.
well, I'll go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, so I'm willing to play with this a little bit to, I want to be reasonable. I don't know what it takes to implement fence line monitoring, but.
So why do we want to wait until November?
Excuse us.
Yeah, Ms. Carriage, really, I know it's late, and I know you're frustrated. You couldn't be more frustrated than I am. We've been at this for a really long time, since 2004, and status quo changes are really hard. So I'm asking for a little bit more patience,
Okay.
and let's hear out what Councilmember Hughes was proposing to amend his motion. All right, his motion.
So I'm willing to amend it with a date certain. And I don't, is a year reasonable? I don't know. Is 6 months reasonable? What?
Sorry, I really need to have you behave.
Okay, there's a point where, you say, this is the deal. And so I give them 6 months to put it in, not to talk about putting in, it's It's physically there in 6 months. And agreement is reached between the city, and it's good to improve the communications. From what I gather, both sides have had some issues there. But it's pretty simple. The agreement is, again, what they give the state and what they give the air board, they give us. And, you know, I would expect we can do with it what we want, you know, as far as that goes. So those are the two things which I think are time specific. Can't do it in 6 months, then unfortunately I was actually a little bit more against this ISO because it looked like it was, you know, about the same as the state until you guys got up and started talking from Valero, and you were kind of bobbing and weaving. And so at that point, you know, I felt like I had to have a specific time, things had to be done, and, you know, it's either do it this way or, you know, we'll do an ISO. And, you know, at that point, you know, you'll be dealing with a harsher situation you are now, because unfortunately there will be a lot of redundancy involved in this. So
I wouldn't be able
deal.
to support the motion and wait until November. First of all, this is an election year, so anybody can say anything they want, and then things will disappear after the election. I wouldn't be able to support it in waiting to November. Secondly, we have no hook, and we could go ahead with this, and we have absolutely no hook to make this work with Valero. And so we already have a Good Neighbor Steering Committee. As I speak, Valero has not fulfilled a condition of approval for a land use permit. And it says in the settlement agreement of 2010, somebody said 2011, but I believe it's 2010, that it's cause for revocation of that land use permit. There hasn't been a meeting with the Good Neighbor Steering Committee in the city for almost 2 years. There's money, over $2 million, is simply not being applied to things as a purpose of implementing the Good Neighbor Steering Committee agreement. And so here we sit, powerless, absolutely powerless. And when I asked in writing, can we enforce the terms of the land use agreement, the condition of approval, a matter of zoning law, I was told, no, it's not time. I was amused by Marilyn Bardet testifying in San Francisco at the Air District when she said, I've grown gray waiting for these monitors. People, please be real. This is serious. We've been at this a really long time. What is the harm of sending this out for expert review, suggestions? Maybe it would come back and it would say, you know, you really don't need to do this. You have these other hooks. But right now, we have no staff expertise to tell us how to get what we need to get. And we're going to wait until nearly after the election? I'm sorry. That is just not the way I envisioned my service as mayor to this city.
Could I respond to that? I'll make it quick. You know, the hook is Valero doesn't want an ISO, and the backing to that is you'll be here after the election, I'll be here after the election, and the vice mayor will be here after the election. Now, I can't do a lot of things well, but I can count to 3 very successfully. So we will be here after the election, and I swear to God, I've never backed off on anything I promised to do. So for me, it's 6 months, you know, and, you know, when it comes to the monitors, they're better be in place, they're pretty close in place, and an agreement better be reached, or I'm voting for an ISO, you're voting for an ISO, and I'm not voting for, when I say that, I'm not voting to send this to staff, I'm voting for an ISO, which I assume is what you'd like to do, what the vice mayor would like to do, and the 3 of us will be here after November 1st, after December 1st, after January 1st. So
So point of clarification.
That's what you got.
Councilmember Schwartzman, and then we need
Thank
to
you.
call, we need to clarify the motion, and we need to call.
Well, I'm clear on the motion. I just want to clarify that when you were talking about monitors in place, and I'm absolutely in favor of that, you're talking about what was just approved by the Air District. Okay, anything additional, we have to negotiate.
Right.
Would that be correct? Okay, as long, I'm clear. If they're in place, that's good.
Okay, so let's be clear what the motion is.
Okay, so we have the motion. I'm willing to amend it to include the 6 months expectation that the air monitor, fence line air monitoring is in place.
And the agreement too.
Pardon me? And community air monitoring? No, community, you're not saying community air monitoring. You want a plan moving forward with community air monitoring, but you want the fence line monitoring
I want them in
installed.
place, and if we can, while that's going on, negotiate to add
Okay,
to
that's
the community ones, fine and dandy. But I also want that other part in there, because that was the problem. We all agree on it. Everyone out there agrees on it. We agree on it. When they had the May problem last year, you know, we were sort of out in the dark, and we're out in the dark for quite a while after that. Yet, you know, I'm sure some information had to be going to the air board and had to be going to, you know, the state, you know. So I want that same information. And they have, Valero has to respect us that we can, in fact, if we're giving information which may be involved in lawsuits, we can do what we do when we're in closed session. Just zip it, you know.
And the seconder of the motion understands the changes and agrees?
Yep.
Call the roll, please.
Councilmembers Campbell?
Yes.
Hughes?
Yes.
Schwartzman?
Yes.
Young? No. And Mayor Patterson?
No.